All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian with you guys. Yes, we are doing a show today. Yes, 4th of July is tomorrow. And yes, we've got important news and information for you nonetheless, okay? And in fact, a lot of it is today's international, ironically. But really important things like what's happening in France, Israel, Brazil, that you gotta get caught up on because I think they're relevant to the world and to us. And I gotta say, unfortunately, the Israeli story really pisses me off. So we have that to not look forward to later in the program. All right, Casper.
Well, why don't we begin with France, where mass riots and protests have been taking place since last week.
Cars, town halls, schools set on fire across France as rage over the police shooting of 17-year-old Naël continued into a second night. Enough to force the French president to call an emergency ministerial meeting.
The last hours have been marked by violent scenes against police stations, but also schools and town halls, and basically against institutions and the Republic. It's absolutely unjustifiable.
France has been plagued with scores of young individuals rioting in the streets following the fatal police shooting of a French-Algerian 17-year-old by the name of Naël Merzouk. The teenager was shot at close range at Paris's Nelson Mandela Square during a traffic stop just last week. Now we have some footage to show you, giving you a sense of the aftermath and what some of these protests unfortunately devolved to. Now the shooting itself has many details you should know about. The officer has in fact been put under formal investigation for voluntary homicide. He is currently in custody. Much like the United States, the police unions have denounced the charges against the officer, not the shooting itself. The police officer is not alleging that he had to shoot the teenager in an act of self-defense. He is, however, claiming that he was trying to protect the community at large because he was concerned that the driver was going to mow down other individuals in the area. But video evidence of the encounter conflicted with what the police alleged to have happened. The initial accounts of the events on Tuesday of last week provided to the French news media by anonymous police sources claimed that the driver had plowed into the officers, leading one to shoot. Then a video surfaced on Twitter. So let's talk a little bit about the footage that's been released on social media. So that footage, believed to have been captured by a witness, showed the car was stopped as an officer on the driver's side pointed a gun into the vehicle. When the car started to pull away, a blast was heard and the car hurtled off, crashing into a nearby sidewalk. The teenage driver died an hour later. In fact, we want to show you that footage, so here it is.
This video shows the stop and the moment a police officer aims his gun at the driver's window. As the car drives forward, the officer shoots. The car crashing just down the road. 17-year-old Naël died from a bullet wound, according to a statement from the prosecutor's office, which also says the officer accused of shooting the teenager is now being held on potential manslaughter charges, though the family is pushing for charges of intentional homicide. Some of the anger may have been sparked by initial reports in French media saying the officers claimed their lives were in danger and that Naël was shot because he refused to stop. But the video circulating on the internet shows he did stop just before being shot at point-blank range.
So members of Macron's government are releasing some pretty harsh statements in regard to the police behavior here. For instance, Macron's tough-talking interior minister had a frequent defender of the police, was unusually critical, saying, quote, "An act like the one that we saw, if the investigation confirms the videos that we have seen, is never justified." However, the top prosecutor in the area where this shooting happened said that the teenager had been known to the police for not complying with traffic stops and had been summoned to juvenile court in September for such an incident. So I give you that information not to say that the shooting was justified, but just to give you a sense of what the cops, preconceived notions of this teenager may have been. Of course, this shooting brings up other issues within France, including a law that was passed in 2017, which we'll get to in just a second, and also concerns about systemic racism in their country. We'll also get to that in just a second. But first, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
My mind jumped to how different this is than other countries like America and Israel. So I'm going to give those two examples because I think context is important. So speaking of which, you should also know this. 5,000 cars were destroyed in the protests, burned, most of them. 1,000 buildings looted or burned, and 750 officers hurt. Okay, now, with that context, what do you think would have happened in America? In America, especially 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, right? What would have happened is there would have been massive pushback against the protesters. Everyone in the world would have been arrested. Tons of people would have been shot. And the cop, they would have hesitated a long, long time before they charged them. After enormous pressure, they wouldn't have charged them right from the beginning. Now, I say a couple of years ago because things have changed a little bit. The George Floyd thing changed things a little bit, and now I think that there would be a lot of protests. But burning 5,000 cars, that would have been a monumental event that this country would talk about forever and ever as a need to crack down on protesters, et cetera, right? So because we're not used to protests in America, it happens from time to time, as it did from George Floyd, Iraq War, et cetera. The French are used to mass protests and protests that are much more, to be honest, violent. Now, I love the protests, I don't love the violence. So I'm torn on that. Now, if it was Israel, hundreds, if not thousands of people in the suburbs would have been killed already. They would have said, you injured 750 Israeli officers? Oh, there's gonna be a raid like you've never seen. We're gonna pulverize those suburbs and beat you into submission. Now, France didn't do that either. So look, it's a complicated issue. I love that they're animated and fighting back. I don't love the way that they're fighting back, easy for me to say, but I don't think burning down your own neighborhoods and communities and other innocent people's cars or houses helps anyone.
Right, I think the rioting is counterproductive and it actually takes the attention away from the shooting itself and the conversation that should be had in regard to the current laws in France and what could be done in the future to mitigate such shootings from occurring again. I don't really understand how destroying your own communities is somehow going to change hearts and minds or lead to any type of productive outcome. If anything, it might turn people against the protesters, against the message that they're trying to send in regard to their issues within the country. Look, comparing France to Israel especially, I think is a little tricky because with Israel, there's this concern about attacks by Palestinians, Israelis dying as a result of Palestinians attacking them, right? That is the backdrop or the context in which I would, yes, we've talked about it multiple times. We're going to talk about it on the show today, where the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, sometimes overreact and apply far too much force in responding to perceived threats.
Okay, well, so I'm glad you brought that up because I want to be clear and want to make an important distinction. And right before you said it, I was thinking the same thing. Wait, I want to be clear. They would never do it to Israeli citizens, not to Jewish Israeli citizens. They would do it to only Arabs, like in this case, and minorities, and to people that are in settlements and in the occupied territories, because they consider them, I'm sorry, I hate to say it, and I know it's gonna hurt a lot of your feelings, but they consider them subhuman. They think they're savages that only understand violence, so they just keep them locked up, in an open air prison, et cetera, et cetera. So to them, doing that to Palestinians, well, of course, the only thing they understand is violence. And by the way, these guys are largely Arabs and Africans and minorities in France, so they would have laid down the heaviest hammer you have ever seen. Okay, unless you're talking about China, in which case they go to concentration camps. So just fair is fair. I'm giving you the full context. In America, would they do that to white people? Would they crack down like that? Of course not. We saw it on January 6th. This is half the time they let them into the building, right? But if it's black people or Arabs, whoa. And part of my point here is an ironic credit to France for not treating its citizens differently based on race and ethnicity. I think that they reacted the same way that they would have reacted towards white French people, whereas in America and Israel, you would have had a world of difference based on race or religion.
So let's talk a little bit about the 2017 law that's now come into question following the shooting of the 17-year-old. So it wasn't until 2017 that police in France were allowed to use firearms during traffic stops, including shooting at moving vehicles, which is what happened here. Now, the law allows officers to shoot if suspects in vehicles are fleeing and if they are likely to endanger lives in their flight. In particular, it allows officers to fire under certain conditions if drivers refuse to comply with an order to stop. But the law also stipulates that the police may use their weapons in only cases of absolute necessity and in a strictly proportionate manner. And one of the biggest critiques of this law is that the way that it is written can be interpreted vaguely. It is overly broad, and as a result provides immunity to police who might use their firearms in cases or in instances in which they didn't need to. Also, this is my personal opinion, some might disagree, but if the driver is fleeing, I would venture to say it's actually less safe to the community at large or people in that area if the police shoot and kill the individual operating the vehicle. Then no one has control of the vehicle. That vehicle could plow into a crowd of people should there be people around.
I don't think that's a remotely controversial opinion, except for the government, right? The government of America, France, it doesn't matter. All the governments say, no, we're allowed to shoot people if we don't like them, or they do something we don't like, to be fair, right? But yeah, regular citizens know shooting into traffic is crazy. What if he missed and hit the person in the car next to them? Or what if he hits them? And like Anna said, the car drives into other civilians. Of course it's crazy to shoot at a car, especially because you're clearly not in danger. In a worst case scenario, the car is leaving. So how could your life be in danger if he's leaving? So it's totally unjustifiable, except for the people in government who always justify it.
Now, the 2017 law was passed after intense lobbying by the police unions in France, a powerful force in France as well. Now, for years, union leaders have campaigned for expanded shooting rights, arguing that they were necessary to tackle a rise in crime. So I want to address that for a moment because the context in which this law passed in 2017 is relevant. So beginning in 2010, there was an increased number of terrorist attacks in France. And so the French public sort of went from being against this type of law, allowing police to use their firearms in an expanded fashion, to suddenly, slowly but surely shifting in favor of it. And I think that's indicative of what we see in other countries as well. Whenever there is an increase in crime or whenever there are terrorist attacks. I mean, that certainly took place here in the United States with 9/11. The public and their fear is essentially used in a way to push through legislation, push through laws that could actually make the public less safe or could lead to violations of civil liberties. Certainly in the case of the United States, that is what happened. Now, despite trying to pass, so with that said, I do want to go to this next video because you'll get a sense of what police-involved shootings were like prior to the law and what happened after the passage in 2017.
The 2017 law caused a massive increase of those shootings. Before 2017, 2016, you had basically 120 or 130 shots fired at vehicles in France. In 2017, the law was passed in early 2017. That number increased to 202. And indeed, we went from basically 1-2 people killed every year during those incidents to above 10, which of course is much lower than what it is in the United States, for instance. But by French or even European standards, this is pretty high. If you compare with Germany, Germany has almost none every year.
So I looked into that, and there was actually a record 13 deaths as a result of these types of shootings last year in France, which again, I mean, in the context of the United States is a pretty good year, but in the context of France, where gun culture is not anywhere near what gun culture is here in the United States, those are big numbers. So it's important to understand that. And the French authorities claim that the 2017 law is not at the heart of increased numbers of fatal shootings during traffic stops. They claim the increase can actually be attributed to an increased number of drivers.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
Okay, so there's two really interesting parts of this story, other than it's a giant news event in the world. One is what I discussed earlier, which the point I was driving at is culture matters. And so I'll use my own background. In Turkey, if the state does violence against Kurds, who are a minority, it is perceived very differently than if the state does violence against Turks, which are the majority, very differently, okay? So in this case, France has a culture of protests. So when there is a small rise in cops shooting civilians that Americans would find to be, so insignificant that it's a blip on our radar. It's almost nothing compared to the mass number of shootings we have, both of civilians shooting each other and cops shooting civilians, etc. But for the French, that is an outrage, and they have this great culture of protest. On the other hand, it gets carried away. We don't like the violence, etc. Just full context, but culture matters. Okay, now number two, and again, the other part of the culture that matters is they seem to be treating their civilians in the same way, no matter what their background is. And if you live in France and you're a minority, I'm sure you disagree, and I'm sure you have a lot of great examples. I'm just saying vis-a-vis other countries that are even worse. Okay, and then the second thing that matters is law. Laws matter. They pass a law saying it's easier to shoot civilians, and voila, if you will, here come the cops shooting a lot more civilians, about 10x. The numbers are still relatively low compared to America, country like America, but for them, they went up 1,000%. That's what 10x is. And that's because you passed a law saying, it's kind of okay. So then they started doing it. So that's why we get so animated about politics, because the laws you pass make a giant difference in our lives.
Now, one other thing I just want to quickly mention about the rioting and all of that. One element of the rioting that really stood out to me, aside from all those cars being set on fire and all those buildings being destroyed, was that one of these cars that was set on fire basically drove into, this burning car rammed into the home of one of France's mayors. And as a result, there is a current investigation taking place for attempted murder. I haven't seen any updates to that investigation, but if we learn about them, of course, I'll share those details with you. Cenk, go ahead.
Yeah, so for those of you unfamiliar, there's a lot of mayors of the suburbs of Paris. So lots of different mayors within that general area. And in this case, they were going after the mayor's wife and kids, and it's super scary.
And they were in the home.
And she was badly injured. So that's when we abhor violence, it's not, hey, they symbolically burned a tire and it made a lot of fire and smoke, and they were trying to make a point, but no one got hurt. No, people were hurt. And that's totally unacceptable, because you don't fight injustice with more injustice, you fight it with more justice.
So let's talk a little bit about the accusations of systemic racism in France. I want to give you some context before we go to those details. So France is different from the United States in that those living in the urban areas or the cities, they tend to be wealthier. So if you're living in the heart of the heart of Paris, I should say, you're likely to be, well-to-do, or certainly in a better position than those living in the suburbs surrounding Paris. So the immigrants, usually what we would refer to as like blue-collar workers or manual workers, as they refer to in France, they tend to live in the outskirts or in the suburbs specifically. So when we think of suburbs here in the United States, we think of the well-to-do hoity-toity individuals, but that is not the case in France. With that said, I do want to pivot to this next video, because the rioters and protesters argue that the shooting itself is evidence of systemic racism. And here you go, here's some more details on that.
Basically, for the international audience that is watching us, you have to understand that French suburbs around big urban areas in France, in the suburbs, you have big housing projects, very large housing projects, where where many immigrants are located, basically mostly manual workers. And for the past 40 years, yes, there have been major tensions between the police and the first, second, now third generation immigrants. And when I'm saying immigrants, it's predominantly from the former colonial areas of France, meaning North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And yes, police stops are a very big problem in France, are a very big bone of contention between those youth and the police.
So clearly there are some parallels with the accusations that are made in regard to systemic racism in the criminal justice system here in the United States. I have to be honest, I don't know enough to give you my full opinion or comment on systemic racism in France, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on it, Cenk.
No, look, I'm sure that it exists. I've seen plenty of evidence even from the outside. Like this stuff is so obvious, and guys, it's going to happen in any country whenever you have a culture clash, right? When you have people coming in from different places that look a little different, that act a little different, that have a different, literally culture, and it could be religion, it could be other parts of how they interact with folks, and so it happens with Latino immigrants and white Americans here. As one of many examples, right? And so is that going to happen in France? Of course. Are the poor going to have less power and be more abused by the police and government? Yes, all across the world, no matter what the race or background is, the poor always suffer more. And so all this stuff seems like a mini America. Right? So
it does, but I don't want to make the mistake of seeing other countries through the lens of America or being an American, right? Sometimes when we do that, I think that we show what our major blind spots are. You get what I'm saying? Like their context might be different. There might be differences that we are not privy to. So I just want to be careful about drawing an exact comparison here.
Yeah, I get you. I think partly what I'm saying here is, look, even in some of the most lovely Northern European countries that have basically some form of socialism and really are great to their citizens, there's still pushback against immigrants. Because whenever you have a culture clash, you have pushback, okay?
Yeah.
So, and especially because immigrants tend to be poor because they're looking for opportunity, right? And poorer people, generally speaking, have certain things that happen, right? Like I know when my family was poor, some folks did some things that they might not have done if they were rich or middle class,
right.
etc.
So let me give you an example, right? And I am not accusing the 17-year-old boy of being involved in this at all. I want to be clear about that as I give you this statement. But one of the things that French authorities have complained about in these communities, in these suburban areas, with these immigrant, with the immigrant population, with people who tend to be poorer, is that there's rampant drug trafficking taking place, right? I don't know how rampant it is, but that would inform the police to have more of a presence in those neighborhoods in an effort to squash that type of crime. So that tends to get a lot of innocent people caught up in nonsense they really shouldn't be caught up in.
Yeah, just to finish the thought, and again, partly because I'm not biased, but partly because it happens everywhere. So now Turkey has a huge immigrants of Syrians and Afghans that are in the country, even though they're the same religion and similar look, etc. But they're a different nationality and they are not Turks, so they're not ethnically the same. And what happens? Pushback against the immigrants, and they're committing more crime, and they're bringing drugs into the country from Afghanistan. Same exact things that you hear in other places. So a lot of that is, happens. But we got to be better, and some countries are better at dealing with that, knowing it's going to happen, counteracting it, and some countries egg it on. Right? And so it's hard for us sitting here in America to tell where France is within that spectrum. But as you heard from that guy, at least when it comes to the cops interacting with people, whether it's different background or poorer, the Germans do it better apparently, right?
Yeah.
And other countries do it better, and France doesn't do it quite as bad as America, it looks like from the outside, but could be better.
So one other thing that I'll note, because this is important in understanding why it's difficult to pinpoint the issues with systemic racism in France. France does not allow the formal collection of race-based statistics and data in their country. Right, so it makes it difficult to look at government statistics because those statistics don't exist, pointing to potential issues pertaining to inequality, a double standard when it comes to policing. You get the picture. But academics can do that analysis. They can collect the data, and you're going to get a little bit of that information in this next clip.
You said there in your report, or I think it's your report on the ground that said there are no statistics in France about that. It's true, there are no official ones, but us academics have the right to collect data about that and to conduct research about that. And well, depending on the research, depending on the era, you have basically something like 8 to 10 times more, a 10 times higher likelihood to be checked, to be stopped and searched by the police if you're of Arab or African origin.
So to me, the takeaway from this story is that two things should be immediately changed. I think the 2017 law that loosens restrictions on police using their firearms during traffic stops, I really think that should be reversed. The second thing is, in order to really fully be informed about what's transpiring in your own country, you need to study your own country. And I think it's crazy that they're not collecting the statistics formally in order to get a better sense of what's happening in France.
And I'll end on a slightly lighter note. I just wish all these countries would be as integrated as their sports. And then, by the way, when you do integrate the sports, as France knows better than anyone, you have a much, much better outcome. So let's integrate already all across the world and get better than this.
When we come back from the break, we're going to go from France to Israel and talk about the latest Israeli raids in Jenin.
All right, back on TYT. Let's go to members first. Nebethit writes in, can I get a happy birthday shout out to my son Lyndon, who turned 3 today and who I gave birth to on my 40th birthday.
Wow.
You see, I did the math on that. Happy birthday to both of you.
Happy birthday.
Okay, not really math, but still. And thanks for being a member. OJam writes in with a critical point, but I think a very, very fair one. This is a question I feel will never get answered, but how come news in Africa is never considered important for the world, even here? A war just broke out in Sudan a month ago, which might drive refugees to important white countries and make their governments more nationalistic. The president of Chad was killed in a battle a couple of years ago. If Zelensky died in battle, we talk about it all week and all year and probably for at least a couple of decades. So you're right, and I feel like we're also partly guilty of this here at TYT. And so, we'll try to get better, but it is a vicious circle. So number one, I'll just speak for myself. I probably read too much mainstream media news, and they just almost never cover that, right? And so it's incumbent upon me and us to go get more international news. As you see today, we're trying, right? And since no one's talking about it here in America, those videos also do terribly. Now, why do I tell you that? To tell you why we don't do it? No, we do it anyway, right? But how many companies are going to, or even individuals are going to decide, I'm going to do a story that will do very poorly in the ratings or views or clicks because it's the right thing to do? Correct answer, not many. Okay, so that's where we are. That gives you probably too direct an answer for your question, but there it is. But for our part, we'll keep trying to do better and better, okay? The throat goat dragon says, systemic racism is unfortunately a problem in most countries. Arabs and Africans get it the worst in France. So that is not surprising given the background that we discussed earlier. Eclectic Miscellaneous says, hi all. What could be more patriotic as we get ready to celebrate the 4th of July than watching TYT exercise their constitutionally protected freedom of the press to deliver honest news and unfiltered commentary to we, the people? Well, that's kind of beautiful. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's great. And thank you for being with us here today, guys. All right, let's go to Super Chat. Brad David says, over the weekend, I watched an old TYT video from 16 years ago when Cenk went ballistic over the USA Today and Michael Schur about the Iraq War. I love how Cenk holds nothing back. Well, thank you, Brad. Yes, that is a pretty spectacular example of that. USA Today sucks something, as a lot of you know, but you can look up the video if you don't. And I do actually get animated about the news, as you can all see on a daily basis, and I have been for decades. Arthur Gonzalez writes in, when any other American citizen would be locked up without bail, how is it that Trump is able to just walk around free? Well, to be fair, a lot of people are walking around free these days, okay? But he's a former president, so he's gonna get special privileges. And Loose Architecture says, free Palestine ends violence. Couldn't agree more. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. And look at all these wonderful Americans. Andrew, or wherever they're from. Andrew St. Dennis just became a member. We appreciate it, Andrew. Great to have you with us. Cloud Dragon gifted 1 Young Turk membership on YouTube. Chris Birch gifted 5, and Vicky Gray gifted 10. All American heroes. We deeply appreciate it, guys. And hit the join button below the video on YouTube if you want to join as well. That way you get to do the honest news with us. All right, Casper.
All right, why don't we start with this?
Israeli forces have launched a large-scale military operation in the West Bank. At least 8 people have been killed and 50 others injured, according to Palestinian health officials.
That is correct. As of now, at least 8 Palestinians have been reported as killed in the city of Jenin today, as 2,000 Israeli soldiers backed by drone strikes stormed the region. 5 teenagers are allegedly among the 8 individuals who were killed. Another Palestinian was killed by Israeli troops while protesting the attack. Now, dozens of people were injured, with 80 people currently reported as wounded. And today's attack marks the most expansive Israeli military operation in the occupied West Bank in 2 decades. So here are more of the details of how the raids and this assault unfolded.
Israel's raid began long before dawn. The morning call to prayer, pierced by the sound of heavy gunfire. The Israeli military says it launched a missile after 1 a.m. local time and carried out drone strikes to clear the way for ground forces. Some 2,000 soldiers are said to be taking part in the large-scale operation. Its stated goal, destroying what the army calls terrorist infrastructure. Palestinian health officials say dozens of people have been injured in the Israeli strikes and the gun battle that followed. Some of them seriously, meaning the death toll could rise further.
Now, Israeli officials are saying that they're not fighting against the Palestinian people and are instead going after jihadists backed by Iran. To give you more details on that, the military said a drone attack struck a joint operations center used by militants of a group known as the Jenin Brigade in the refugee camp, and that Israeli forces also targeted a facility for weapons production and explosive device storage. The military said it had located and confiscated caches or caches of weapons, hundreds of explosive devices, and an improvised rocket launcher. Now, residents of the camp were holed up in their homes. Apparently, they were told, people in Jenin received a text message from Israeli numbers telling them to stay inside, and militants received texts telling them to give themselves up. Now, the Jenin Brigade, which was the target of these raids, operates at this Palestinian refugee camp where thousands of people live in close quarters. It's densely packed. Now, the close proximity to the refugee camp makes it virtually impossible to avoid civilian casualties, which is why we're now getting reports of civilian casualties. And with 2,000 soldiers deployed into the area and helicopter gunships in the air, it's pretty clear that this was more than like this precision operation to take out very specific people. It's the latest and most egregious attack, and it's an escalation of an ongoing tension and violence in that region. So just a few more details, and I'll go to you, Cenk. Tensions have escalated in the area recently, with local Palestinian militias waging a series of attacks against Israelis and extremist Jewish settlers rampaging through Palestinian villages and setting fire to property. There have been almost daily raids by the Israeli military to arrest Palestinians suspected of armed activity. And the killing last month of 4 Israeli civilians outside a West Bank Jewish settlement by 2 gunmen from the Islamist militant group Hamas increased pressure on the Israeli government to take tougher military action against armed Palestinians in the northern West Bank, though this attack was not linked to militants from Jenin. That attack on the 4 Israelis was not tied to the militants in Jenin.
Yeah, all right, so first of all, let me be clear and buckle up, brace for impact. Israel is 100% guilty. Now let me explain. So in my lifetime in covering this issue in America, what used to be the case is that in all these instances, the press would universally, for almost the entirety of my life until recently, would say the dirty Muslim Palestinian savages had it coming. There no violence and they're terrorists, brown Muslim terrorists. Poor Israel, trying to protect its citizens. They had to kill all those Palestinians. Now, recently that has changed. So if, from what I can see, it's become a little bit more 50-50. So in the last, I don't know, however many years, 5 years or so, people go, then now their journalists are like, oh, it turns out Palestinians are dead and not all of them are guilty. Some of them are teenagers, right? And by the way, Jews in Israel have also died. And we should make that clear, everybody should make that clear, okay? So now it's kind of gotten around 50-50 and I'll give credit to the press for that, okay? So why do I say that Israel's 100% guilty? Because you can't occupy people for decade after decade, 60 long, brutal, horrible years in an open camp, let's put it that way, and then go, oh my God, can you believe some of these sons of bitches tried to fight back? They should know their place. I mean, it's almost like the opening scene of Gladiator. People should know when they're defeated. Would you, would I? Would you in Texas know that you were defeated if Mexico occupied you for 60 years? And if any of you fought back, they crushed you and killed your kids? Would you know you're defeated or would you fight back? Now, I am against violence in all its forms, so I don't believe killing an innocent Israeli is going to solve the issue at all, okay?
It exacerbates it.
Yes, and I'm against it. But don't come and say, hey, I'm just keeping these prisoners here for 60 some odd years. And the reason I'm keeping them, and I say this with a straight face, is because they are unable to govern themselves. Say that again, say that again. They're unable to govern themselves. Why? Why are they unable? Say it. Because they're Palestinians, they're Muslims, and they're brown, right? Well, brown is less relevant there because a lot of people are similar shade there. But God, for all the Muslims, the savages, sorry, deeply racist, deeply bigoted. And I've got to tell you the truth, that's just the reality of it. End the goddamn occupation. And by the way, not only does it destroy Palestinians, not only does it create conflict all over the world, but it also destroys the moral core of Israel. If you care about Israel, you have to be screaming at your friends and family and colleagues saying to them, my God, brothers and sisters, you gotta let them go. You gotta let them go. What do you think's gonna happen? What would you do? What would you do? What would you do? No. All they get is more murder, mayhem, and violence. And yes, to the American press and to everyone else, state violence is also violence. Don't tell me, the state murdered and killed and butchered, but that's okay. The state kept them as prisoners, and if they went this way or that way, they get crushed. But no, that's not violence, that's not violence. Only when a civilian fights back, that's violence, terrorism, awful. No, hell no, definitely Israel's fault.
There's also the continued construction of Israeli settlements in Palestinian territory, which exacerbates the conflict, and needlessly so. And we do have some more details on what led up to this deadly moment. Let's watch.
Tensions in the West Bank, particularly in the northern West Bank where Jenin is situated, have been very high for the last 15, 16, 17 months. An operation to try and target militants in the area has been ongoing in that time, and the city has seen nearly nightly raids, or certainly cities throughout the West Bank have seen nearly nightly raids from the Israeli military during that time. Now, in recent weeks, just 2 weeks ago, in fact, there was another Israeli raid on Jenin refugee camp, and that didn't quite go to plan. One of the vehicles, as it was retreating, was targeted by a roadside bomb. Now, in the wake of that, there were calls from the far right in the Israeli government. Calls, they were saying that we need a bigger here in Jenin, particularly in the north of the West Bank, a wider operation. And it does seem that this might be what you might say might be answering those calls.
And there were fatalities in the previous operations, military operations in Jenin. At least 3 Palestinians were killed in the Israeli drone attack on June 21st, while 7 were killed and more than 100 wounded in a raid that involved helicopter gunships over Jenin on June 19th. Now, Israel's right-wing government also recently announced plans to build 5,000 new illegal settlements in the West Bank. And Israeli officials are saying that there is no end point. They're going to continue doing this indefinitely. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, an IDF spokesperson, says, we'll do it as long as it's needed. There is no timeline on this right now.
Of course, they're going to keep the occupation forever and ever. They're going to just totally brutalize those people for the rest of time. And they're gonna do it for 100% bigoted reasons. And then when challenged on it, you know what they're gonna do? ADL did it today. Rashida Tlaib put out a benign tweet about, hey, this is terrible, you shouldn't do this kind of oppression. And ADL, which has done great work in fighting bigotry in America, I love them for it. And they stood up for Muslims. They're not Israelis, they're Americans, Anti-Defamation League. And they've done a great job of not just defending Jewish Americans, but Muslim Americans and other guys. But whenever it's political, whenever it's Israel, what did he do? Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the ADL, done great work in the past. He says anti-Semitic. Okay. How dare you question me while I'm in the middle of being a racist? I'm gonna call you a racist. I'm gonna say you're an anti-Semite. You should know when you're defeated, and you should know when you to be controlled by your superiors. No, sorry, Jonathan, no deal, no deal. There's tons of wolves out there right now. Anti-Semitism is real. And in the middle of all these wolves, you're gonna cry wolf? No deal, disgusting.
Let me shed a little more light on that, because what Congresswoman Tlaib was drawing attention to was the fact that Palestinian medical personnel, they're claiming that Israeli soldiers are essentially blocking, they're not allowing emergency or medical personnel to enter the area, the refugee camp, in order to save people's lives and provide treatment to them. And so there's more on that in this next clip. That is what the ADL was responding to. That was the statement that Rashida Tlaib made.
How dare you try to rescue citizens?
That ADL responded to. So let's watch that video.
We often hear very loud exchanges of gunfire, and then we hear ambulances. We've been speaking to the ambulance service in the last hour. They say they're being allowed in, but it is sporadic. It really depends on the soldier who's on the checkpoint that they need to negotiate at that point. And when they get in, there is a real difficulty in moving around, simply because, as we've been saying, so much of the infrastructure has simply disappeared. We have seen not only Israeli military vehicles, but dual bulldozers moving into the camp in Jenin, and they're ripping up the road, moving cars out of the way, damaging people's property, and the ambulances then have to negotiate that.
So if the Israeli government is arguing that this is not an attack on the Palestinian people, that they have no interest in harming the Palestinian people, how do you make that argument as the IDF is blocking medical personnel from getting to wounded individuals in Jenin?
No, there is no argument. And look, guys, whether it's the Pentagon in America or the Israeli Defense Forces, do not listen to the press. The press tells you should take everything they say at face value. If the IDF says it must be true. No, I don't believe anything the IDF says. They're like, oh yeah, we had to bulldoze those homes. These attacks against Palestinians, where we killed the Palestinians, they are not Palestinians. They're literally saying that. It's Orwellian. Oh, well, they're Palestinians, but remember, they're terrorists, monsters, Muslims, terrorists, monsters. No, we have to since they're such monsters, we have to just keep them in prison for the rest of their lives. And they should just know not to complain about it. So Rashida Tlaib says, can you let the ambulances in? And Jonathan Greenblatt says, anti-Semite. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? In a country now filled with anti-Semitism, where we're all worried to death that it's gonna explode, you're gonna come in and cry wolf like that? And then no one's gonna believe you the next time that it's real. Because, oh, no, Israel, no matter how horrific, must be defended. And must be defended 200%. It doesn't matter if they're guilty. It doesn't matter if they're wrong in that particular instance. Nope. Occupation? So tell me, one person justify the occupation without being racist. You can't do it, it's impossible. Well, I mean, if we let them go, they might attack us. Well, every country might attack us. And there's Greeks and the Turks hate each other. The Turks and the Persians hate each other. The Russians hate the Ukrainians hate the Russians. The Estonians, the Russians, everybody hates each other. And from time to time, people attack each other. But everyone in the world is allowed to have a country except the Palestinians. Except the Palestinians, why? Every single time it is a form of racism when they say, well, they can't control themselves. Well, they're savages. Well, they would attack us. Well, you know how violent they are. You know how they are. Muslims. Hate, right, hate. And then say, what? Anti-Semitism, what? Just me, I can be racist all day long. I can be bigoted all day long. I can imprison them for 60 years and not give them dignity and respect and self-government and say to them, you are uniquely savages, and you're the only ones not allowed to have your own country, not allowed to have your freedom, and then I'm gonna call you a racist for defending them. Hell no.
All right,
let them go, Israel, let them go. but you won't do it. You won't do it because you've now sworn allegiance to permanent hatred of Muslims. It's ruining your moral core. You're destroying your country. Israel could be a great country, something that we could all be proud of. Instead, look at what it's turned into. Massacring kids because we have to maintain the occupation because they are savages. No, I got news for you. It's not them who's savages. Young Turks. All right, let's go to members. Cats and Dragons says, seeing Israelis ruining a road so ambulances couldn't get into the injured is heartless. There were innocent people that really needed help. But are they really innocent? They're Palestinians. You know, and what do you want us to do? Free them? We're not gonna free them. No, every once in a while we're gonna come and kill people. And then we're gonna say, well, obviously the ambulances couldn't help them because they're savages. Burrito Bandito says, are people who support the French president known as Macronis? Okay, thank you for lighting it up. Jenks Left Tricep Fury says, until TYT, I never understood the true happenings going on in Palestine. Mainstream media always is tilted towards Israel, so we never got both sides' view. Thank you, Jenk and Anna, for opening my eyes to this abhorrent situation. The truth matters, it does. Tatiana in Japan says, gee, do you think Jenk cares about this topic? Guys, yeah, I'm super animated, right? And why? Is it because I feel some connection to the Palestinians because I was born Muslim and that's my background? Probably that's a part of it, okay? But the other part of it that drives me absolutely out of my mind is the gaslighting. No, the people who are occupied are the violent ones. Just like they do here in America. Blacks are violent. Are you insane? Are you insane? You're the ones, and I'm sorry, this is not about white people today, okay? That is super important context. But you don't get to come from a background that did all the violence, the whipping, the lynchings, the beatings, the stealing of the babies and giving it and selling off the goddamn babies and then call them violent. No, I can't stand the gaslighting. I can't stand it. And by the way, same is true of my background. Like, so, oh no, the Armenian genocide didn't happen. When we abuse the Kurds, it doesn't happen. It's okay because it's Turks, and no, it's okay because it's Kurds. You know how Kurds are. No, I don't know how Kurds are. What do you mean? What do you mean? Tell me what you mean. I don't know. Oh, you're being racist. Okay, I got it. So it's true of my people just as it is true of any people. And the gaslighting is unbearable. Unbearable. There is one salient fact in Israel, the occupation. As long as the occupation persists, I'm sorry, I love you, but Israel is 100% guilty. Stephen Scales, Cenk, I remember your coverage of Israel dropping bombs on children playing on a beach. I was so struck by your emotions that I actually cried. That was a first, but I've shed many more tears since then. But here in America, nobody's, at least in government, is shedding tears. The American civilians, there's a different question. The American citizens are all over the place, and a lot of them are in the good, have good place in their heart for Palestinians and for Israel. But in terms of our politicians, we put out a statement saying like, goddamn right, okay, Israel's always right. That's the statement we put out. It's a load of crap. It's disgusting, the American government's support of bigotry, racism, and occupation. Shy Coltrane 42 says American taxpayers are footing the human rights atrocities perpetrated against the Palestinians. In fact, in one of the instances, they used an Apache helicopter. We must all be so proud. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Go ahead, Anna.
All right, well, we've got an update on the CHIPS Act, which we had previously given Biden credit for, but there are some issues here. Let's talk about it.
Today, I'm signing the law of the CHIPS and Science Act, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. Today, I'm ordering my administration to be laser-focused on the guardrails that will protect taxpayers' dollars. This includes requirements that companies building these semiconductor facilities pay Davis-Bacon prevailing wage to ensure the tens of thousands of new construction jobs are union jobs.
As is evidenced by the video you just watched, Joe Biden promised when he signed the $52 billion CHIPS Act that jobs would be created for America, well-paying jobs, union jobs. But is that actually coming to fruition? Because according to a new report, one of the potential beneficiaries of the CHIPS Act, which is a Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company, TSMC for short, they're planning to not use American workers or unionized workers. They're planning on importing workers from around the world in order to build their massive facility in Arizona. Now, a recent investigation by the American Prospect has revealed that said facility has been plagued with safety violations and alleged wage theft. We'll get to those details in just a moment. There is a lot to cover. So let's start with how this company, this Taiwanese company, TSMC, is doing what's called internal offshoring, AKA bringing workers into the United States in order to build their semiconductor factory and chips in America. Here's what 3 anonymous chip supply chain executives told Nikkei Asia. Nikkei Asia. So TSMC and its suppliers are in talks with the US government to assist with the application process for non-immigrant visas in a bid to dispatch more than 500 experienced workers as early as July to expedite the construction of clean room facilities and the installation of pipes and other equipment. Now, according to one of those executives, American workers don't have enough experience building semiconductor manufacturing factories, which has led to slowdowns for this company's Arizona facility. That is what they're alleging. And according to a report by the New York Times, insiders at this company have the nerve to insult American workers even while the company exploits them. So some TSMC engineers said that they were concerned about how the Arizona factory would blend American and Taiwanese employees. In Taiwan, engineers work long hours and weekend shifts, joking that they sell liver to work for the chip manufacturer, they said. Such sacrifices may be less appealing to employees in the United States, they said. One former TSMC engineer had this to say, quote, the most difficult thing about wafer manufacturing is not technology. The most difficult thing is personnel management. Americans are the worst at this because Americans are the most difficult to manage. And in response to the news, the president of the Arizona Building Trades Council told the American Prospect simply, it's a effing disgrace. Cenk.
Yeah, so mixed thoughts on this one. What do I mean? First, hungry people are generally going to work harder than non-hungry people. That's just a fact of life, right? So, but then these companies that are based abroad kind of brag about it. They're like, our citizens are in much worse shape, so they've got to even sell their liver to be able to work for us. Ha ha ha! That's so funny. And then they're gonna work their lives away for us because they're hungry and their family's hungry and they need to do something about it. You guys aren't as hungry. Can you believe you just want to work a normal job and get paid a normal salary? We hate you. Well, okay. I mean, there's a little bit of truth to the fact that yes, like I said, hungry people sometimes work harder. But I don't think that's a thing you should brag about. That's point one. Point two is, as usual, what I can't stand is the political lies. So here, one of our, somebody in a super chat wrote in, or one of our members wrote in saying that Biden is the gaslighter in chief, okay? And there's a lot of truth to that. So he's like, oh my God, we're gonna do the semiconductors here in America. And well, first of all, that sounds good. That's a good start. You do want it made in the USA. There's a good reason why they need to be made in the USA, okay? And it's good politics, so lots of wins there, right? But then he says, like, don't worry, we get the jobs. We got the jobs, right? And it's guaranteed this, that, and the other thing. No, it's not. No, it's not. So Intel fired thousands of people right after the CHIPS Act passed. They got $52 billion of our money. Our money, my money, your money went to billionaires. The CEO of Intel made $179 million that year alone. But he fired thousands of people. Did Biden put in protections? Nope, he didn't put in protection.
That was in the initial writing of the legislation, but wow, what a shocker, that provision didn't make it. But that's the thing, Biden is aware of that. So when he is selling this legislation to the American people in a speech, which you saw in the video we showed you in the very beginning of the story, why does he feel the need to lie to us about how this is gonna create all these wonderful, well-paying union jobs? especially when he knows full well that there are no safeguards in place in the final law that ensures that these factories are employed by American workers. And that's the part that really bothers me, just like the flat out lie to sell this to the American people. And look, I support manufacturing chips here in the United States. I think that the coronavirus pandemic showed the fragility of our supply chains, relying on every other country to produce what we need here in the United States puts us in a vulnerable situation. So just the act of ensuring that we are manufacturing chips here in the United States is great. I would also like to see some safeguards to prevent these corporations from, selling the chips to other countries without prioritizing us here in the US. So that's another issue that I have with the outcome of that legislation. But Cenk, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so look, we try really hard to be fair on this show. So when Trump bullied an American corporation into not outsourcing, keeping jobs here, the left were like, how could you possibly bully a poor company like that? And I remember doing a video, it was at an airport. I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but I was like, no. The president should bully the companies to keep the jobs here. He's supposed to look out for us. I'm like, this is a rare thing that Trump did right. So we're honest about that. And by the way, you know what happened afterwards? As usual, Trump was full of crap. And later, that same company fired thousands of people, and Trump didn't do anything about it. He was just huffing and puffing. It was just marketing, right? At least it's smart marketing, but he was a liar, and he lied about that. He didn't do a goddamn thing, and they outsourced jobs. Now we go to Biden. And by the way, the left was super mad about that. They were mad about the so-called bullying, and then they were mad that thousands of people lost their jobs and Trump was a liar. So now Biden does something very similar. He goes, I'm gonna keep the jobs here and the semiconductor, I'm gonna funnel the $52 billion to my corporate donors. I mean the semiconductor industry, because of you, I'm gonna keep the jobs here. Bring them in from Taiwan, bring them in, yep. And fire our guys, no problem at all. Go ahead.
And not just from Taiwan, I wanna be clear, all over the world. They're bringing in workers from all over the world instead of using American labor for this.
And then, so now the right wing goes, Biden's so terrible, and the left wing goes, no. When things are inconvenient, you just ignore them. So when Biden's a liar, we say that's not the same as Trump. He's a good liar. He's got a good heart. He's from Scranton. It takes Amtrak all the time. I don't give a goddamn. He's a liar.
So let's talk a little bit about what these facilities are like. Now, the company alleges that no. Look, when it comes to building the facilities, when it comes to building the factories, yes, we're bringing in some workers from other countries, but this is temporary. They'll leave after that, as if that's supposed to make us all feel better about the fact that they're refusing to use American labor for this. But nonetheless, there's an excerpt from a report, an investigative report that was done by Lee Harris about these facilities, TSMC's facility, which was published before the news of the additional 500+ workforce, and that they're bringing in from other countries. And this is what Lee Harris reports in the American Prospect, quote, I went to Phoenix to interview construction workers on site and found that while some union contractors have secured jobs at Fab 21, most workers at the site are non-union. Many are international migrants and out-of-state workers. So even prior to this latest report breaking, the one that we're sharing with you, they were already leaning heavily on migrant workers who would come here, do the work, and potentially be sent out of the country after their jobs are done. Specifically, Harris claims that only about 3,000 of the 12,000 employees at the facility are American union workers. TSMC has partnered with a Taiwanese company called Proper SYS or Proper Sys to help build the facility. One worker posed as a recruiter and ended up recording their conversation with an office administrator with this third party. The worker asked Proper Sys employee or the Proper Sys employee whether his relatives with work visas could work on the site. Quote, most of our guys are women from Taiwan, so we're very familiar with work visas, the administrator replied. If one of my people, if one of his work visas is being processed, would he still be able to apply and get it while the work visa is coming in? The worker pressed. Yeah, the administrator said. Like we have a couple of people and it all is by situation, but we do have some people who are currently on student visas here. And they've already been hired for a job when they graduate and get their work visa, so upcoming visas as well. So not only have they been leaning on migrant workers, not only are they currently leaning on migrant workers with this latest report of 500 plus people being brought in from out of the country, but they intend to continue, at least there's some indication they intend to continue to do so moving forward.
All right, so two more things. One is, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. So do you have to pay a little bit higher wages in America than you do in some of these other countries? Yes, you do, okay? On the other hand, is it the idea that American workers are lazy, is that true? No, that is not at all true. I've seen the graphs, so this is not anecdotal, or this is not my opinion. This is just facts. The productivity in America is sky high. And it's been sky high for decade after decade. And part of the reason productivity is so high is because now a lot of us have to take 2 jobs. The husband and the wife have to work, and the productivity keeps piling on. So the idea that Americans are lazy is totally and utterly not true, okay? But they just keep saying it for their own economic interests. The second thing is that what I was gonna get to anyway, but it's one of our members asked a great question that's a perfect lead into it. Rainbow Bright wrote in, I love how they say creating union jobs while allowing union busting and never passing union protections into law. Am I missing something? Yes, let me tell you why you're seeing that phenomenon. Because unions also give campaign donations, and primarily to Democrats. So that's why Democrats like Joe Biden are like, we're gonna create the union jobs and union, right? But wait, they never actually do any protections as you're talking about.
That's unfair. No, the NLRB under the Biden administration, relatively speaking, has been good.
So for Biden and the NLRB, that is correct. And we've given you some of the upsides and downsides. When I say they never do the things, I'm referring to what Rainbow Bright mentioned, which is passing laws. So every time a Democrat comes in, Obama, Biden, Clinton, et cetera, we're gonna pass the PRO Act. We're gonna make sure that these union protections are there. And they never, ever pass them. They don't even come close. And most of the time they don't even propose it. Why? Because they get a lot more campaign donations from corporations. So they go, hey, thank you very much, suckers at the union. And for your 20%, those corporations are giving me 80%, even for Democrats. I'm gonna do exactly what they want. But you guys, I'll say some of the stuff that I do for them will create jobs for you guys. I'm not gonna give you any protections. I'm not gonna pass any bills. But the best anyone's done among the Democrats, to be fair to Biden, is have a strong NLRB like Biden does. That's like at this much, but he's like, I gave you crumbs, what else you want, right? Pass legislation, I'm gonna pass legislation, ruin the idea that I can get more corporate contributions. So hence, I'll say, I'm past this bill, I gave $50 billion to my donors, but you guys will get more jobs. Later, you find out you didn't. That's because the other guys bribed Biden and the Democrats and all of the Republicans more than you bribed them. Welcome to American politics.
And the allergic reaction to potentially hiring actual American unionized workers has a lot to do with what corporations love about deregulation here in the United States. And it's being able to cut corners with impunity. So for instance, if you look at what the injuries look like for employees over at TSMC, well, not so great. So Harris's investigation found that the TMC factory suffers from widespread safety issues. Luke Casper, a representative of SMART, the sheet metal workers union, said the following: "It's easily the most unsafe site I've ever walked on. I've been in the trade 17 years. Everyone that works at the hall and out there on site agrees it's by far the most dangerous, unorganized job site they saw." And so, for instance, one worker in his 60s allegedly fell off a ladder and ended up breaking up both of his legs. And there are other examples. Coworkers have fallen from great heights through scaffolding and flooring. And all of this, you should keep in mind as this particular company applies for certain tax credits. I want to go to graphic 9 here. TSMC is angling to receive tax credits and grants from recent federal legislation totaling up to $15 billion, and that's according to the Wall Street Journal.
No, look, that's such a great example of the crime that is American politics. Because they say, look guys, we got to give the grants to these corporations, not because they're bribing us, no. Their campaign contributions are coincidental. Totally coincidental. I mean, I took the money and I used it for fame, wealth, status, etc. But we're not doing it because we're doing it to create jobs.
Right.
And then they say, well, did you create jobs? They go, well, no, I just gave it to more Taiwanese people, and I made sure that nobody in the union could get it, and Americans can't get it, and I brought in all these foreign workers, and I fired the Americans. But wait, I thought you were giving them our money so that we could at least have jobs, American jobs. Oh, that was a lie because you just took a bribe. But do mainstream media journalists explain that to you? No, they earnestly write, they did it for the jobs. And they never come back and go, oh, sorry, our bad. Trump and Biden were both liars. Well, they say Trump's a liar, but not Biden. No, that $15 billion, they had to give taxpayer money to a foreign corporation and get no American jobs in return. They had to do it. No, they didn't have to do it. They get bribed on a regular basis and they do it for their own greed. Politicians are not to be respected, okay? Politicians are usually the worst of us, not the best of us. Don't believe mainstream media.
All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back for the second hour of the show, we'll talk a little bit about the latest accusations against Donald Trump and his attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.